What I want to talk about is HIV, particularly with our sisters, our mothers, our sisters, our aunties, and so on and so forth. I have a very, very deep and soft spot for my sisters. My sisters I've always loved. They always had my back, and they still do. And I'm going to do everything I can to help and support my sisters, because I've seen a lot, and I've seen a lot of unfairness, and wherever you find a bitter and angry, broken woman, you can always trace it back to a male. Now I'm not saying all women are innocent and free, but a lot of the majority, from what I've observed and what I've read and what I've experienced, it always come back to a male in some form or another breaking the spirit and the heart, usually when they're very, very young. And the pathology that develops as a result grows with her, and she carries it out, and she begins looking for relationships and formulating bonds with men who in many ways perpetuate the abuse, the neglect, and so on and so forth. So if I can use my platform and my voice to help our sisters to realize and recognize the errors in their ways and make better choices, again, that's why I'm here. So years ago, I worked in social outreach, and what we did was use music, theater, and entertainment as a tool or vehicle to educate and empower at-risk inner-city kids. And a part of our job, aside from traveling around, meeting different people and doing shows with a message or what have you, was that we facilitated workshops. And we would go into the prison systems, we went into receiving homes for troubled young people, and so on and so forth. We went into a receiving home one time for troubled young men. And I will never forget this. Now, listen to me closely because I'm building up to something. We did a show, and at the end of the show, we facilitated a question and answer period, and then we did a workshop. The very first time I heard someone literally say that because they have HIV, they're going to give it to as many people as possible, was at a correctional facility for young men. This young man was no more than 15 or 16 years old. He had a very, very rough life, but he was the typical pretty boy. He was very light-skinned. You know how people are with that light-skin mess, that colorism. But he was light-skinned, so-called pretty boy. Could pull a woman like that easily, a female like that, This guy was very, very angry. I remember we had a workshop, and the workshop was about HIV prevention, and he was open and honest that he had it. I think at that time, the people who were HIV positive had to be transparent because they're, with others there, and, it had to be known, because let's be real, there was sex going on in there, and there were a couple of honest guys who admitted to that. I mean, I'm just going to keep it real, because there are a lot of us that are just still truly in la-la land, in denial, and y'all think, oh, I'm just not going to accept this, or I'm not going to approve of it. Like, that's going to make people not do it. Like, it's just going to somehow make it invisible and not real. So the reality is there is sex going on in any all-girl, all-boy facility where people are locked up or locked down or confined for a prolonged period of time. That's just the facts, the reality. A lot of rape is going on as well. So this, getting back to what I was saying, this young guy was very angry, and he said in front of everyone, when he gets out, he's going to go out, he's going to give it to HIV, he's going to give it to as many people as possible. Again, this was my very first time hearing someone admit to this. The second time, years later, 2001, family friend, this guy was formerly married. While he was married, he was on the down low. By the time we met him, meaning my family and I, by the time we met him, he was a new person. But let me just tell you, before he became clean and a new person, he lived on the down low for years. He was in a marriage. In that marriage, he birthed 4 children. 3 boys, 1 girl. He was 40 years old at the time, but he looked a lot younger than his age, and especially from where he had come from. This was someone who ended up on hard drugs, crack, you name it. He was doing crack, he was smoking, he was doing alcohol, weed, you name it. But crack, cocaine was his drug of choice. It created turbulence in his marriage, and his wife kicked him out in the street. None of his family members wanted to deal with him. So essentially, this guy lived on the streets for 8 years. And to support himself and his habit, he prostituted. He was a male prostitute. Now, mind you, this guy had HIV. He contracted HIV when it had first become an epidemic. So he was in that pool. A lot of you guys weren't around then. You know, those of us who are old enough, we remember the outbreak and the crisis and how people were dropping like flies. He got infected around that time. But what was interesting about this guy is that he's no longer here. But ironically, he did not pass away from HIV. He actually passed away from throat cancer because the guy was smoking 8 packs of cigarettes a day and had started from about the age of 13. That's what he told me. He had been smoking since about the age of 13 all the way up into 40. But he had HIV and caught it at a time when it was a true pandemic. And what made him interesting is that he was not taking any drugs or anything, but he would not get sick. The virus wasn't replicating or anything. So the CDC and NIH was interested in studying him to find out what was it about his immune system that kept his viral load in check versus everyone else. So he was going to NIH and, you know, they was experimenting. I wouldn't have done it, but he did it. But anyway, he went to NIH and, you know, they were giving him the premise that they wanted to study his makeup to figure out a possible cure or a way to treat HIV. So he was basically donating himself to science around the time when we met him. But again, he ended up developing throat cancer, and that's what he ultimately passed away from. So I need to give that as a preface. Again, this is now in 2001 when we came across his brother. He's a new person. He's clean. He's drug free. He's still smoking, but not as much as he was earlier in life. And he's out of the closet. He's no longer living on a down low. He's living in his truth. Now, one day we were talking, and he looked really disturbed. Now, you guys who are not familiar, I happen to have that strong, powerful gift of discernment. I can see beyond the veil. I can see what others hide. I just know things. I was born with this ability. So I knew that there was something really troubling this brother this particular day. So I pulled him to the side. I was like, what's going on? You okay? You know, I can tell something is going on. You want to talk about it? So people always felt comfortable talking to me because I don't judge. I don't condemn or judge anybody who's at least trying to find their way. Now, yeah, when it comes to children, when you are victimizing the elderly children and so on and so forth, I'm not as forgiving, but generally speaking, when people are going through things and they may be different or, you know, they're dealing with something that a lot of people judge them for, they would know that they can come to me and talk to me without judgment. So this particular day, I pulled him to the side and I got him to open up, and here's what he told me. He said, Anthony, that's my government name. He said, Anthony, do you know, or can you begin to imagine what it's like to live every day of your life knowing that you could have infected thousands of women. Keep this in mind. Thousands of women through having unprotected sex with their husbands or boyfriends. He was saying that he often go back and think of those days of him on the street as a male prostitute. He said on average he would do about 8 to 10 Johns a day. That's what he called them, Johns, back then. I'm not sure what they call them now. Back then, he had 8 to 10 Johns a day. And he told me that the majority of those men were regular. And he knew these were married men. He knew that these men lived lives as straight men. He said that these men rarely asked him to wear a condom. And he also said, again, this is adult conversation, all right? He also said that the majority of these men would ask him to penetrate them and to ejaculate in them without a condom. Now, he said he never disclosed or never told them that he was HIV positive, and he really didn't care because all he cared about was getting his next high. Now, this brother, this is 2001, he's about 40 years old, and he's like 8 years clean. So we're talking about like the early 90s, early to mid 90s, where this guy was out there having sex with hundreds of men who lived as heterosexual, who were married, who had girlfriends and children. And now this brother is reveling in the reality that he knows he's probably infected a lot of those men, and those men has turned and infected their wives. And of course we know that a lot of women who give birth to children are passing HIV to their children. So I was sympathetic with him, and I told him that I do understand. I can't imagine because that's not my walk, but I can understand how and why that would haunt him now that he's in a clearer headspace and he's living in his truth, how painful that is. Now, this is what fear generates when people are living in a perpetual state of fear and loneliness and depression and angst and anxiety and so on and so forth. There's no way in the world we can think with a clear conscience. So a lot of times we are making decisions that are to our detriment in this state. And it's not until we get to a place of having a clear mind and clear consciousness that we truly understand the impact of what it is that we're doing. So what I told the brother, I said, you were sick. You were sick. You are now a different person. You must first now work on forgiving yourself and using your life and your light as a beacon to educate those who need it, the women in general, helping other men who are battling their same-sex attraction and issues to come to terms with it and to live in their truth. And even if they're unable to live in their truth, give them advice as to how they can at least protect themselves and protect the ones they're with. Because the reality, people, is that I don't care how much you shame, how much you attack, how much you bring the Bible out and condemn and say people are going to hell. It's not going to stop these men from doing what they have always done. It's just not. And guess what's going to end up happening? These same men you all are sitting around judging and condemning, and I'm not accepting it, and y'all trying to promote this climate of non-acceptance and hate and intolerance. Those men are going to get with your daughters, they're going to get with your sisters, they're going to get with your mothers to hide and try to be something that you keep insisting they should be. So you see, it ends up coming back home one way or the other. Or that judgmental attitude and that hate and that lack of willing to at least understand, hear these people out and understand their backstory. So maybe because you can't accept it, at least you can have a better understanding or understanding of what it is all about, and then become more neutral in your position towards these people. Because the climate that we have had and continue to have is not working. That's just the reality. And although HIV among our sisters had dropped significantly, it's still the #1 killer of our mothers, our sisters, aunties, so on and so forth, our women. So until we create a space or a safe climate where these men can just come out and live their truth and educate them with where they are not where we want them to be, this trajectory will just keep on getting worse in terms of our sisters being negatively impacted. Now, y'all want to talk about self-destruction? That's a big whammy right there for you to deal with. That's why you won't hear me outright shaming and condemning these guys. I would rather educate them and empower them to just live in their truth. Doesn't necessarily mean that I have to accept anything. There are a lot of things a lot of us are doing that we don't like or accept. But does that mean we have to dehumanize somebody constantly because we don't accept it? No, we don't. There are things we got people around us doing every day that leads to an early death, or that can lead to an early death, but we're not constantly shaming, condemning, and vilifying and dehumanizing them because of it. So don't tell me y'all can't develop a neutral point of view when it comes to this thing, and to at least develop more of an understanding and create a safer climate for these people to just be truthful about who they are and to help lift their esteem in the process. I'm talking about the men on the down low and the women who have low self-esteem, who continue to attract and have unprotected sex with these guys and living promiscuously still in this day and age, knowing what is out there. That's deeply rooted in a lot of low-level, low-vibratory thought, projection, belief systems, and attitudes and emotions. That's just the reality. So for this to change, the root of the problem has to change. You get it? So that's the solution right there. But how many of us are willing to put our ego and our pride aside to do that? Well, guess what? If you don't, the universe has a way of making you do it. So the ladies, unless you're trying to have a baby, and even then, you should go and get you and your partner checked for not just HIV, but STDs, period. Unless you're trying to have a baby, you should wear a condom at all times. Don't rely on the man to get, they have female condoms out there. Okay? If a man doesn't want to use a condom, you shouldn't be laying up with him. In this day and age, I really don't even care if it's your husband unless you know his status. Because you don't know what your husband or that man you're putting all your heart, soul, and trust into. You don't know what he's really into or what he's doing when you're not around. That's just the reality. Because there are a lot of married women, look it up, who got HIV and STDs and all kinds of stuff from their husbands, who are usually living a double life, some triple, quadruple lives. I've seen them. So I want to share this one with you guys because the message is getting out there, but it's still not getting out there enough. We need to see more men talk about this without being judgmental, and we need to see more women seeking to understand both sides of the equation. That which we hate, that which we fear, that's what we continuously judge and condemn, will be attracted to us, magnetized to us. so that we can overcome it, or it will be birthed through us by way of our seeds, meaning our children.